Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the sort of education that's going through schools and universities in the West at the moment. And I think there's few who would dispute that when you look at the critical race theory and the social studies, sociology, and African American studies, gender studies, and black studies, and all that sort of stuff, that it's very much anti-white, anti-Western, and very much anti-merit. When you sort of bring these things together, it's sort of talking, if you're that anti-capitalist and anti-white, then and anti-merit in particular, then you're looking at really a socialist style indoctrination for the students. Now, I say it's indoctrination because it's not giving both sides of the story. It's not giving a broad, this is the whole spread of options. These are the pluses of capitalism. These are the negatives. These are the pluses of socialism or Marxism. These are the negatives. These are the historical examples of how it's been tried. So that when I talk to friends of mine who've got, say, kids in high school or even in college for that matter, and I talk about the big events of in terms of in the 20th century, such as Pol Pot in Cambodia, the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution in China, the various mass killings and murders in the Soviet Union, the Holodomor and the Ukraine, and the Stasi in East Germany. Talk about all of it. They know nothing about it. They just stare blankly at you. They've got no idea. Now you mention Hitler or something. Hitler, and they're onto it. So they're taught nothing about the negatives of the communist, socialist, Marxist type societies that the world has attempted over the years, and the most terrible failures of these ideologies. But at the same time, they're taught that a merit system creates inequality. That inequality is unfair. And if anyone thinks in terms of pride of their nation or pride in their country or their society or their diaspora, then that's equated to being the same. I mean, you're Hitler. You are Hitler if you think that. So everything to do with capitalism, nationalism, national pride, excellence, merit, that's all fascist Nazi. In fact, you may even be Hitler. In fact, Hitler was seen going out the back door just a moment ago. So why don't you head off with him, you damn fucking fascist? So the kids seem to know. They're not being taught about it. Even the education about fascism and Nazi, that's deeply ideological in terms of the teaching. It's just it is a bad. You think fascism, you think bad, you think evil, you think white people, you think Nazis. So it's more mental conditioning than education, as far as I can see. Now the basis, or the easy to digest basis for it all is that if outcomes are unequal between genders, between races, between people, for whatever the reason, if outcomes are not equal, then there must be something inherently wrong in that society, because all outcomes should be equal, and if they're not, then it's a problem. And if the outcomes are unequal between races, then it's racism is the problem. If there's a different outcome between the genders, then misogyny is the problem. If there's a different outcome between different nations, then it's because capitalism is the problem and exploitation and so on. So there's always a structural societal problem that the Marxists claim that exists, and the reason they say that is because outcomes are unequal. Now, a very simple thing is some people have harder working, maybe they're fitter, they're brighter, they're whatever. Now, it's not that the Marxists won't concede that, that those things do happen, but they insist that then those people are obligated, as in through the Marxist system and the socialism, are socially obligated to work much harder than other people because they're capable of doing so, and that the surplus or the additional surplus that they create then goes back into the pot. where all can share. So it's each to his ability and each to his needs. So now your merit, for whatever extent it may exist, is determined by those who adhere most fervently to the ideology. So if you're a fanatic supporter of the ideology, then you can get more benefits out of the system, because that's the measurement of merit. The merit isn't what you produce or create or anything like that, or how hard you work. That's not the merit. The merit is your following and your adherence to blind obedience to the ideology. The reverse is also the same, that if you question the ideology or say there's something wrong with it, or that it creates unequal outcomes of a different kind, then they could very well put you in prison arbitrarily, or even kill you for that matter, or lock you up in a lunatic asylum, because after all, you must be crazy if you think socialism isn't the best system ever. Now, given it's been taught in schools, and again, even in private schools, that where parents are stumping up, $50,000 a year plus change to put their kids through, even there, it's minimal coverage of these things. The heroes are still, Nelson Mandela and Gandhi, and anyone who's not white is their hero, and these are white students, for fuck's sake. So, is it necessary to run a counter or have an education system or a platform or access to information that gives both sides of the story? Now, it's become, it's absurd that no one knows anything about Stalin or Chairman Mao or Pol Pot. I mean, these are some of the most massive disasters in human history, and in the recent past as well. It's not something that was from 10,000 years ago, and you'd think that would be mandatory, but yet teachers' unions around the West, as well as many left-leaning governments, and certainly the globalist-controlled governments, for some reason they don't want that taught or even talked about. There's no reading material that's recommended that contains this sort of information. It's very much white people, capitalism, Nazis, bad, and that's really it. Other people, other non-white people, good, and they just don't go into the details of it. Now, when I was at school, which isn't, for goodness sakes, that long ago, the teachers, and there were teachers, I think back sort of afterwards, there were teachers who were quite left-leaning and quite sympathetic to leftist causes, but you wouldn't know it. They didn't talk about it in class. You would see it with, say, history teachers and the sociology type. You would see it there, but only very, very gently. They were very careful not to talk about this in class, and not to make their feelings clear. Now, I remember there are a few teachers that, and I think more in a weak moment, they would let out their thoughts, but otherwise it was very, very hard to determine which what political views or attitudes or ideological views or attitudes they may have held. So it was possible to have teachers who taught the curriculum and didn't go down the path of ideology and or stacking the deck heavily in one direction, rather than having an even spread of subjects and discussions. Also, I remember in history class there would be talks amongst the students and the teacher where it was sort of put into like an open forum sort of thing. Well, what do you think about what Stalin did, and that sort of stuff. And I remember at the time, and these views formed sort of more solidly later on, that for whatever the failings of the capitalist system, the rule of law and due legal process and organic, merit-based development was the most equitable ultimately. It meant there were unequal outcomes, but that was a price to pay for the protections of the law, of an independent law, of clean, free and fair elections, and those. So you got this much out of it, and the price was you had unequal outcomes. Now the socialists take a different view. They say, well, all that stuff must be bad. It must be bad, because the outcomes are unequal. And if the outcomes are unequal, then everything is bad. And it must all be gone and dismantled, destroyed, crushed, eradicated. And we have to start again from year zero and make sure that we have this ideological paradise where all outcomes are equal, unless you are a fervent adherent to the ideology, in which case you will rise and have more benefits than the others. Really, when you look at the Soviet Union or any communist country, there's a small elite at the top who live like aristocrats, and they have all the benefits and the luxuries of aristocrats, and they may pretend to be men of the people and all this sort of stuff, but they live like aristocrats. All the nice houses on the waterfronts, and all the servants, and all the the attendants to run around after them, and all they're fucking aristocrats for goodness sake. Unlike say in the the 19 say Australian prime ministers, for example, and Australia was a capitalist country. Now here's a prime minister who was once an engineer on the railways. Lived ordinary life, and he had a house in what was a semi-rural township, and he became prime minister, and he lived in that house, and he retired on his pension. He was an ordinary guy. He would walk to the local grocery store to get his food, and he was a man of the people. He was closer to the socialist ideal of a man of the people and a citizen equal to other citizens. He was closer to that than Ben Chifley was his name, by the way. He was closer to that than Stalin or Khrushchev or any of those people ever were. I remember being rather surprised. I wasn't long out of high school, and I was walking through the downtown Sydney, and an election was coming up, and there in the middle of this plaza or this square was the Prime Minister of Australia talking to citizens as I went by. Do you have any questions for me? Can I explain any of my policies? This is the Prime Minister of Australia doing. I mean, fuck. Now I'm sure he had security, but they were far enough back that they weren't obvious. So can you imagine that in any other place? Again, this man of the people thing, and so this idea of the citizen and the primacy of the citizen and the primacy of law, that's more a Western thing than it is, and a capitalist system, more than it is in any other system. You can't be arrested arbitrarily, and there's the writ of habeas corpus, that things that are really being dismantled at a rate of knots now. Look at January 6th, people being held without charge for months. But coming back to the education side, do we have another layer of education? Do we create a separate education and then market that vigorously to parents who are concerned about the very one-sided indoctrination type of education they're getting, and make sure the children have a broader understanding of the world and of history and of the terrible failures of the past. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution in China, the millions upon millions that died from that, the tens of millions of deaths in the Soviet Union. Somewhere between 15 and 20% of the population of Cambodia was murdered by the Pol Pot fanatics, the Khmer Rouge. And Khmer and red being, because the French had colonized that, Rouge being the French word for red, and Khmer being the local word for Cambodia. So the red Cambodians, and millions, like the killing fields, millions dying there. These are things that should and must, in my view, must be taught. The failures of the past, the mistakes of the past, must be known. But instead, the education system in the West today is cut all that out. There's nothing about that. And again, when I talk to students including students in private schools who are in year 11 or something like that, they know nothing about these, nothing, not even a thing. They just stare blankly at me when I'm talking about it. Same thing when I'm talking about, that Gandhi was just some rich kid from an affluent Indian trading family who just bored and had nothing to do, and his life was meaningless, so he decided to become an agitator for independence, and that was all it was. He wasn't anyone that was striving for independence. He was no great man. I mean, far from it. But he's become so, but only because white Western lefties have made him that way. But in reality, he was nothing like that. And so again, the students that I talk to, they but I thought Gandhi was a great man, and he was fighting back against the evil white fascists. No, that's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. So is there a need to create this fight back education thing that does teach these things? Accept the failures and shortcomings of capitalism. Gee whiz, there's nothing wrong with that. But also talk about the rest of it, and make sure that the students know that whenever an ideology is pursued at any time, ever in history, it's ended badly and will so again. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.